Welcome to Demand Utopia, a Solarpunk podcast. I'm your host, Justine Norton-Kertson, and on today's episode, we're asking whether the clean energy transition can escape the extractive logic of the fossil fuel world, or whether, quote, green growth is just building a new generation of sacrifice zones. But first, a quick note that in the episode description, you'll find links to the news articles and other sources we use or mention in this episode. You'll also find our website, solarpunkmagazine.com, where you can listen to episodes of this podcast, get issues of the magazine, you can read our blog, and more. Solarpunk Magazine is a 501c3 nonprofit publication. If you want to support our work, you can subscribe to Solarpunk Magazine through our website or through our Patreon, where you can also get various levels of bonus content for both the magazine and this podcast. You'll find links to both our website and Patreon in the description for this episode. All right, let's jump into today's topic. Solar power doesn't just come from sunlight alone. Wind power doesn't come from wind alone. And an electric vehicle doesn't come from good intentions. Like artificial intelligence, the clean energy transition has a body. It's made of lithium and cobalt, nickel and copper, graphite and manganese, rare earth minerals, steel, aluminum, and sand. It's made of water, labor, land, ports, ships, refineries, factories, waste, and the communities living near every part of that supply chain. That doesn't mean that the transition's wrong. It means the transition is real, and there's no questioning that we need a clean energy transition. Fossil fuels are heating the planet, poisoning communities, and locking us into systems that can't survive their own consequences. But the real question here is whether we can build a clean energy future without reproducing the violence of the fossil fuel world. If our answer to the climate crisis is simply to dig up different things somewhere else for the same economic system, then we haven't escaped extraction at all. We've only changed its color palette and moved the wound. And recent news about critical minerals makes that tension unavoidable. Reuters recently reported that G7 nations are discussing a permanent secretariat to coordinate their critical minerals agenda. The idea is to create continuity across rotating G7 presidencies because the politics of lithium, cobalt, rare earths, and other minerals can no longer be treated as a minor side issue. These materials sit underneath the energy transition. They also sit underneath defense, manufacturing, trade, and geopolitical power itself. This isn't an abstract issue. Reuters also reports that France convened G7 discussions on critical minerals and rare earths because wealthy industrial nations are worried about dependence on China's dominant position in global supply chains. French Finance Minister Roland Lescure argued that China's position allows it to push prices low enough to drive competitors out. So this is partly a supply chain story, partly an industrial policy story, partly a geopolitical story about who controls the materials that will shape the next century. And when nations panic about scarcity, well, justice is often the first thing that gets pushed aside. But for our purposes, this is also a solarpunk story. Climate Change News has a related piece about the energy transition's rare earth problem, noting that about 80% of modern EV drivetrains rely on high-performance, rare earth, permanent magnets to convert electricity into torque. That helps explain both the rising demand and the rush to find alternatives. But the deeper question isn't just where wealthy countries get their minerals, or whether startups can design around rare earth bottlenecks. The deeper question is what kind of transition we're building. Will it be organized around justice, sufficiency, repair, and consent? Or will it become a new race to control the next generation of extractive resources? That choice matters before the first permit is even approved. In other words, What does a solarpunk energy transition do differently? The clean energy transition is necessary. That has to be said clearly. Fossil fuels are destabilizing the climate, poisoning communities, funding authoritarian power, and locking societies into destructive infrastructure that becomes harder to dismantle every year. We need electrification. We need renewable energy. We need batteries, trains, heat pumps, grid storage, and fossil-free industry. But necessity can become a dangerous excuse. It can tell us we need minerals, therefore all mining is acceptable. We need batteries, therefore all battery demand is justified. Or we need electric vehicles, therefore mass car dependency can continue unchanged. We need speed, therefore consent's optional. We need supply chains, so someone else's watershed, forest, desert, or sacred land can become an acceptable loss. That's how green growth becomes the old fossil fuel logic in a new costume. A mine doesn't become ethical because the thing it feeds is branded green. The old extractive economy always had a story about necessity. We need coal for jobs. We need oil for freedom. We need pipelines for energy security. We need sacrifice zones because modern life demands them. The danger now is that we repeat that structure with cleaner language. We say we need lithium for climate action, cobalt for batteries, rare earths for clean motors, copper for transmission. And suddenly, the moral complexity disappears behind the urgency of decarbonization. But Solarpunk has to keep the complexity visible. Who lives near the mine? Who works there? Who drinks the water downstream? Who gives consent? And is that consent real? Who gets displaced? Who's profiting? Who gets the clean energy technology made from those materials? And who's told that their land, labor, or health has to be sacrificed for someone else's low-carbon lifestyle? These questions don't mean we abandon the transition. No. They mean we refuse to make the transition innocent by pretending its costs are invisible. Solarpunk isn't anti-technology, far from it. Solarpunk is anti-sacrifice zone. Solarpunk doesn't ask whether extraction can be hidden behind a greener brand. It asks whether demand can be reduced, materials reused, power redistributed, and communities given actual authority over what happens to their land and water. That's a harder politics than simply swapping inputs. But it's the only politics that deserves to call itself regenerative, because it measures success by harm reduced, not merely carbon moved. And that starts by asking whether every battery, every vehicle, every gadget is actually necessary for the future. The cleanest mineral is the one we don't have to mine. That may sound obvious, but it changes the whole shape of the energy transition. The most solarpunk move isn't simply replacing every gas car with an electric car. It's building communities where people need fewer cars in the first place. An electric car is better than a gas car in important ways, sure. It eliminates tailpipe emissions. It can run on renewable electricity. It can be part of a cleaner transportation system. But if our entire vision for the future is one electric car in every driveway, we're still accepting a car-centered world, sprawling roads, giant parking lots, long commutes, isolated neighborhoods, traffic deaths, tire pollution, debt, and enormous material demand. The goal isn't one electric car in every driveway. The goal is a society where fewer people are forced to need a driveway. That means public transit over car dependency. It means walkable neighborhoods where daily life doesn't require a private vehicle. It means bike infrastructure that's safe enough for children, elders, and ordinary commuters, not just confident cyclists in reflective gear. It means e-bikes, cargo bikes, shared vehicles, smaller cars, smaller batteries, fewer luxury electric SUVs marketed as climate virtue with a 2-ton battery attached. It means more trains, more buses, more repairable vehicles, more proximity. Because a car-centered clean energy transition still creates enormous demand. Battery demand, road demand, parking demand, steel demand, asphalt, copper, land. Electrification lowers tailpipe emissions, yes, but it doesn't automatically solve sprawl, congestion, traffic violence, road rage, household transportation debt, social isolation, or resource extraction. It can even make some of those problems harder to see because the vehicle itself feels cleaner. And this is where sufficiency becomes important. The question isn't only how we power the system, it's how much system we actually need. A Solarpunk transition designs for lower material throughput from the beginning. It asks how many private machines we can replace with shared infrastructure, how many long trips we can replace with local services, how many disposable products we can replace with repairable ones, and how many oversized batteries we can replace with smaller ones because the vehicle's lighter, the trip is shorter, or the train exists. It also asks what kind of housing pattern makes extraction necessary. If people are priced out of dense neighborhoods and pushed farther from work, from school, food, and healthcare, then transportation demand rises. If local services disappear, travel demand rises. If every household has to own its own version of every tool, every vehicle, every appliance and device, material demand rises. So less extraction isn't only a mining policy. It's also a housing policy, a transit policy, a land use policy, a repair policy, and a cultural policy. But even after reducing demand, we still need minerals. So the next question is how to keep minerals in circulation. A just transition has to treat minerals as long-term public resources, not disposable inputs. That means mining can't be the only supply strategy. We need repair, reuse, remanufacturing, battery recycling, material recovery, and design standards that make recovery easier from the beginning. Otherwise, we're not building a clean energy system. We're building a temporary storage system for future waste. Right now, too many products are designed as black boxes. They're sealed, glued, proprietary. They're difficult to open, even more difficult to repair. Difficult, if not impossible, to upgrade. Difficult to recycle, and sometimes deliberately hostile to anyone who wants to maintain them outside an authorized corporate channel. That's not innovative. That's planned waste with better branding. And planned waste is extractive. It forces new mining to compensate for bad design. It turns minerals into throughput, dug up, processed, sold, used briefly, discarded, buried, burned, or forgotten in drawers and landfills. It treats the earth as a warehouse and the future as a dump. A Solarpunk transition would move in the opposite direction. It would make right to repair a basic climate policy. A Solarpunk transition would require batteries and devices to come with clean material information, repair pathways, and end-of-life recovery plans. It would make producers responsible for what happens after the sale, not just what happens before the profit. It would favor standardized parts, modular design, durable products, public recycling infrastructure, and local repair economies where maintenance is skilled work, not a nostalgic hobby. Every battery should be treated not as fodder for a future landfill, but as a temporary arrangement of minerals that must return to public use. That phrase is important because it changes the moral status of the object. A battery isn't just a product. It's a concentration of mined minerals, energy, labor, water, chemistry, and ecological consequences. If we use it once and throw it away, we've failed those materials and the communities they came from. There's also a social dimension here. Repair cultures create jobs. They build local knowledge, reduce dependency on distant corporations. They keep values circulating in communities. A repairable world is usually a more democratic world because people are less trapped by closed systems they can't understand, modify, or maintain. Recycling alone can't meet all near-term demand, especially while the clean energy system is still scaling up. We should be honest about that. There's still going to be mining for a bit. There's still going to be hard trade-offs. There'll still be conflicts over land, water, labor, and need. We're not beyond that yet. But if we don't design circularity now, today's transition becomes tomorrow's waste crisis. We will have replaced smokestacks with supply chains, but kept the same disposable imagination. Circularity reduces pressure, but it doesn't erase the need for extraction. And that's why consent is so important. If mining is necessary to any degree, it has to be governed by consent, justice, and ecological limits. That starts with rejecting the idea that some communities are disposable. The fossil fuel economy was built on sacrifice zones. What do I mean by that? I've said it a number of times. I mean coal towns, refinery corridors, oil fields, pipeline routes, poisoned aquifers, asthma neighborhoods, and workers who are abandoned when the boom ends and the company leaves. The promise was always that someone had to pay the price for progress. Someone's lungs, someone's river, someone's land, someone else's future. A just energy transition can't reproduce that pattern with different minerals and then turn around and call it liberation. We can't create lithium sacrificed zones, cobalt sacrifice zones, nickel, rare earth sacrifice zones. We can't create battery waste sacrifice zones or pretend that the word clean has solved the moral problem. Clean for whom? Clean where? Clean at what point in the supply chain? The clean energy transition can't be paid for with someone else's poisoned river. That especially means indigenous consent, not consultation theater. It means free, prior, informed consent. It means communities having the actual power to say no, not just the chance to comment at a public meeting after the decision's effectively been made. Consent isn't a box to check. It's a relationship to power. It also means strong labor protections, strong water protections, biodiversity protections, cleanup bonds, and long-term accountability. If a company profits from extraction, it shouldn't be allowed to disappear when the cleanup bill comes due. If a project threatens a watershed, a sacred site, a subsistence practice, or a community's health, then the burden of proof shouldn't fall on the people trying to protect their home. And we can't simply outsource harm to poorer communities, to rural communities, colonized lands, or politically marginalized regions. A supply chain isn't ethical because the suffering is far away. Distance is one of the tools extraction uses to soothe the conscience of consumers. The G7 story is partly about reducing dependence on China. That might be strategically important, maybe. But no country wants its energy transition entirely dependent on another country or another government, their processing capacity or their trade decisions or so-called price manipulation. But supply chain security isn't the same as justice either. Never mind that we should be cooperating rather than considering other countries' rivals. But if wealthy countries respond to critical minerals anxiety by stockpiling, hoarding, militarizing supply chains, and accelerating extraction without democratic consent, then we're still inside imperial resource politics. We're still treating the world as a map of inputs to be acquired and secured. A solarpunk transition has to be more honest than that. It has to ask not only where minerals come from, but who decides, who benefits, who's protected, and who has veto power. So the alternative isn't purity, it's governance. It's deciding what we mine, why we mine it, how much we mine, who benefits, and who has the right to say no. So then, what should critical minerals be for? If critical minerals are limited, and if extracting them always carries some ecological or human cost, then not every use deserves the same moral priority. That might sound obvious, but it cuts against the logic of the capitalist market. The market says materials go wherever profit sends them. If a company can make more money putting a huge battery into a luxury electric SUV than into a bus, then the market will choose the SUV. If rare minerals can generate higher returns in disposable electronics or surveillance systems or military escalation than in public infrastructure, the market won't pause to ask whether that's wise. It'll ask whether demand exists and whether the price works. But for us, Solarpunk has to ask a different question. What should critical minerals be for in the first place? They should be prioritized for uses that support life, public need, ecological repair, and collective resilience. Grid storage matters because it helps renewable energy become reliable at scale. Public transportation matters because one electric bus can move a lot of people with far less material per person than a fleet of private cars. Medical devices matter because they sustain life. Accessibility technologies are important because they expand freedom, communication, mobility, and participation. Disaster resilience matters because climate disruption is already here. Efficient housing is important because a well-built home lowers energy demand for decades. Essential communications are important because people need information and connection in daily life and in crisis. And repairable public infrastructure is important because it keeps value circulating instead of becoming waste. That's a very different moral universe from burning through scarce materials for luxury consumption, disposable electronics, and planned obsolescence. Not every battery deserves a mine. A battery in an electric bus isn't morally identical to a battery in a luxury vehicle so large it replicates the waste of the fossil fuel era with a cleaner drivetrain. A mineral used in grid storage isn't morally identical to the same mineral used in a disposable device engineered to be replaced. And a rare earth magnet in an accessibility technology is not morally identical to one in a weapons or surveillance system. The material may be the same, but the purpose isn't. This is where a solarpunk transition becomes more than a technical transition. It becomes an ethical sorting process. If materials are limited and extraction has consequences, then justice requires prioritization. We have to decide what forms of life we're building with the Earth's body. A society that uses lithium for buses, grid storage, and mobility access is making one kind of moral choice. A society that uses it primarily for luxury SUVs, disposable electronics, and endless private consumption is making another moral choice entirely. That doesn't mean every decision is simple, and it doesn't mean that there's a pure category called good technology and another called bad technology. But it does mean we can't allow profit to be the only sorting mechanism. This is why the climate change news story about rare earth alternatives for EV motors is important. If companies can design motors that use fewer rare earths, or none at all, that can reduce pressure on supply chains and ecosystems. Technological substitution can be important. Efficiency can matter. Better chemistry, better design, and smarter engineering can all help. But substitution isn't enough if demand keeps expanding without limit. Efficiency gains can be swallowed by growth. A car with fewer rare earths still participates in car dependency if the entire society is organized around private vehicle ownership. A more efficient gadget still contributes to waste if it's designed to break and be replaced every 2 years. So then the final question isn't only what materials we use, it's what kind of society those materials are building. A clean energy transition that keeps the old logic of extraction, hoarding, disposability, and unequal sacrifice isn't enough. Yes, we need electrification, we need renewables, we need batteries and heat pumps and trains and grid storage, we need efficient buildings, and we need fossil-free infrastructure. The answer to the mining problem isn't to cling to fossil fuels. Fossil fuels aren't clean, safe, democratic, or sustainable. They're the foundation of the crisis. But we also need a different idea of progress. Progress can't mean replacing one extractive empire with another. It can't mean treating every ecological limit as a supply chain challenge to be overcome by force, finance, or geopolitical maneuvering. It can't mean wealthy countries competing to secure minerals while asking poorer communities, rural regions, indigenous nations, and workers to absorb the harm. It can't mean calling something green because the pollution happens somewhere else. A solarpunk transition has to be more honest than that. It asks how we can electrify while reducing demand. It asks how we can build renewable energy without turning the world into a new map of sacrifice zones. It asks how many private vehicles can be replaced by public transit and how many oversized batteries can be avoided through smaller vehicles and shorter trips. It asks how many devices can be repaired instead of discarded and how many materials can be recovered before new land is torn open. It also asks who has consent, who has veto power, who owns the infrastructure, who profits, who cleans up, who benefits, who lives with the consequences. And it asks whether our vision of the future is still trapped inside the assumptions of the present. More consumption, more growth, more private ownership, more technological churn, more extraction hidden behind nicer branding. Solarpunk offers another path. Sufficiency instead of endless growth. Repair instead of disposability. Public transit instead of car dependency. The right to repair instead of sealed black boxes. Recycling and urban mining instead of treating landfills as destiny. Smaller batteries, longer lifespans, indigenous sovereignty, worker power, public infrastructure, and less extraction by design. The energy transition has a mining problem. But the deeper problem isn't that clean energy requires minerals. The deeper problem is a civilization that treats the earth as inventory, communities as obstacles, and consumption as destiny. A solarpunk transition has to do more than change the fuel. It has to change the logic. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Demand Utopia, a Solarpunk podcast from Solarpunk Magazine. Don't forget to check out the links down in the description, and if you want to support us, check out our website and join us on Patreon, where you can get all kinds of bonus content. Have a great day, and remember, the energy transition isn't just about what we use, it's about how we use it.